Hello everyone, my name is Carlos Loza, and today I'm going to present a collaboration project for the country of India. We are submitting this to the faculty of Brahman University, especially for Dr. Paul G. in partial fulfillment of the HRCU 603 Globalization and Diversity class. Hope you guys enjoy it. The first section on this report is the question of what are the key demographics indicators that we need to open a facility in India. In order to answer the questions, we need to look at some indicators. And these indicators can tell us different things about the country, especially the region that we are trying to open a location. For example, these indicators can be about education, the gender, the poverty, employment, the size, the sex ratio. So all of that type of information that can be helpful, that can tell us about the workforce that it will be available or not. Other key demographic information could be the ethnicity, the gender, the marital status, the income, the education, all that information that can truly help an organization to gather the data and make a decision on a location where they can decide and put and open a facility for business. According to the United Nations, there are 5 key human development reports. India is one of the largest democracies in the world. It acquired its independence from Britain since 1947. It has 29 states throughout the country. India has many languages, 179 and 554 dialects spoken throughout the country, but Hindu and English are the 2 official languages. The first of the 5 key human development reports is population. And India actually at the moment has a population of 1.3 billion people. The density of the population is about 324 persons per square kilometer. Continuing with demographics, uh, India's education is expected for schooling for about 12 and a half years. That's approximately high school. Um, so about 51% of the people that graduate from high school continue their education. The literacy rates is pretty high, it's close to 70%. The workforce availability equals to 15 and older is about 52%. The workforce participation is about 15 to and older to close to 54%. The gross national income per capita is about 6,353 purchasing power parity, and the GDP per capita is 6427 purchasing power parity. So now that we saw the key indicators to opening a facility in India, the question for human resources management is what are some of the implications that we will face when opening a facility in India? And some of the facts that we found in this research is India is growing at a steady pace of 7% year on year. It's one of the world's fastest growing economy, and India wants to be the world provider of human resources capital, kind of the same thing as China being into manufacturing. So we're going to start seeing those services being provided by some Indian states to the Western countries. Also, India is a multicultural, multilinguistic, and multi-religious mix of human capital, and the Eastern and the Western models will not work effectively in the country of India. Then you will need some local adaptations, which means cultural intelligence trainings for those companies trying to open a facility in India. India is a growing magnitude demographic diversity country. They have the resources of human capital, and the land is available to open those business facilities, um, and the opportunity to open those office, businesses there. Continuing with the report about India, the next segment is about culture. And we're going to be discussing the differences and similarities of the culture of India and the USA. And some of the facts that we found between those two countries is the family ties. Families in India are extremely close. Young people um, stay home until they marry. In the USA, most of the kids are detached once they complete high school, then they move to university, and they might or might not come back, and that's when they claim they're independent. Uh, the goals and hierarchies are different. In America, we are highly goal oriented, and we are working to achieve those goals as fast as possible, either by yourself or with the teamwork. In India, decisions are made in hierarchy, and people below are empowered to follow. Business relationships, Americans wants to get straight to the point and not waste any time. Make sure they get whatever it is, get it done as soon as possible. In India, they like to connect with each other. They like to have small talk. They like to get to know each other before making abrupt decisions. And a lot of times when Americans and Indians do business together, they see the differences, and India might consider this as being rude or abrupt. According to Hofstede, there are 6 cultural dimensions that we need to consider that are critical cultural factors for human resources. And the first one is power distance. And in this power distance, India appreciates hierarchy. They like a top-down structure in society and also in organizations. So they will never cross boundaries. They like to follow orders, and the person to be responding to anything will be the person on the top. Um, where in America, they like to work in teams. They like to achieve a common goal and work together towards that goal. The second factor is individualism. This dimension identifies that in India, uh, the workforce likes to uh, belong to a group, as a large social setting. They like to work as a team. Individualism is an aspect of India's dominion in religion and philosophy. Americans view this individualism as a form of kind of a liberty and justice for all, meaning that all managers rely on their employees and the teams to get the job done, and they will hold people accountable for their actions. Americans are not shy of doing business or approaching anyone to seek information. They want to get the information to make sure they get the job done. The next factor is about masculinity. And India's and the Americans score really high, both of them together. They believe that masculinity is it's high on their society, and the success on power it belongs to the masculine side of this typical behavior. Um, the next factor is a certain avoidance. In India, this type of factor accepts uh, for the organization to just let it ride to see if it happens. If it happens, that's great. If not, then it was for a reason. And they welcome that, whatever the outcome would be. Where in America, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not, but most of the time they're going to go after what they need, what they want. They're not going to take failure for an answer. A lot of times, Americans are very tolerant of opinions and will allow freedom of expressions, but they're going to get the job done. The next factor in the culture is long-term orientation. And the facts that we found was that India likes to maintain a norm society. They honor the traditions. They continue with the religious beliefs and practices. And Americans, on the other hand, like to check data before making a decision. They want to make sure it is truthful and accurate before pulling the trigger. And many times those norms will be questioned and challenged all the time. And the last factor about culture will be indulgence. And India scores low in this dimension versus versus the USA, which scores really high. And this is because in India uh, they restrained themselves towards indulgence. They get what is given to them, and they don't put much time in the leisure time, and and uh, and they see it as a wrong. Where in the other hand, Americans they say it as you work hard, you play hard, so enjoy yourself and indulge as much as you can. Um, so this is my section that I completed. For the next section, I would like to introduce Kelly O'Connor, which will continue with the next slides of presentation. Thank you.
Hi, this is Kelly O'Connor, and I'll be taking over for Carlos from this section on. So, next we will review employment law within India, as well as the differences between India and the United States when it comes to employment law. So, employment law in India is complicated. There are 422 million workers, and nearly 94% of them are part of the unorganized sector. This includes contractors, hourly workers, part time workers, self employed, or farm workers. And workers in this sector are not protected by employment laws, and they also do not usually receive health benefits. So the remaining 6% of workers are part of the organized sector, and they are eligible for health benefits, retirement, social security, and other government mandated entitlements. They would also be covered under these employment laws. The organized sector employees are protected by these laws, and even when the national government or individual states enact legislation like minimum wage laws to extend these protections to unorganized industries, the laws are often toothless. So today we'll review workday restrictions, regular and overtime pay, paid annual leave, and redundancy. So first we'll cover workday restrictions. So in India, the standard workday is 9 hours versus in the United States, it is 8 hours. Both countries have a standard work week up to 6 days, or 6 days is normal to be working. India, on the one hand, though, does offer a premium for work on the weekly rest day, which would be most likely Sunday, whereas in the United States, there's not a mandated premium if you're working on Sundays. In addition, in India, there are nighttime restrictions for work. Women and underage workers can only work between the hours of 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. unless they have permission from the chief inspector to relax those times. They are prohibited from working between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. And this is part of the Factories Act of 1948. And this was enacted not only for the safety of women traveling to and from work, but also to reinforce part of the cultural norm in India for women to not work outside of the home. There are also weekly holiday restrictions based on the different federal holidays in India, as well as ages 15 to 18-year-old would be limited to working a maximum of 4.5 hours per day. So some human resource management implications of these differences would include managing a longer workday, since the norm is 9 hours, and for some industries it can go up to 12. In addition, the nighttime restrictions for workers who are women would need to be accommodated through scheduling, as well as what work they would be able to participate in. If it were something that can only happen in the evenings or overnight, they would not be eligible for those positions, as well as younger workers and needing to accommodate their limitations or hours that they're able to work. Next, we'll cover regular and overtime pay. In India, there is no standard minimum wage, but based on your industry, age, and state, there are many different levels of minimum wage that you may be eligible for, with over 2,000 possibilities. In the United States, there is a federal minimum wage of $7.25, and some states have their own regulations which require a higher minimum wage. In India, you are eligible for overtime if you've worked over 9 hours in the day or over 48 hours in the week, and overtime pay is 2 times your standard pay rate. Whereas in the United States, you earn overtime after 40 hours of work during the week, and overtime is 1.5 times of your regular rate of pay. So there is a big difference there, as Indian workers are eligible for overtime on a daily basis, whereas in the United States, it's only a weekly consideration. However, in India, there is a restriction on overtime of not working more than 12 hours in the day. So some implications for human resources in India would be budget considerations, considering the higher rate of overtime pay, as well as the ability to reach overtime on a daily basis. In addition, you are managing multiple minimum wage regulations based on the nature of the employment, the industry, the employee's age, as well as the region. So there's a lot of regulations that go into ensuring you meet the minimum wage requirements. So that would be a project for HR to stay on top of those regulations and ensure that workers are paid the correct amount. In addition, overtime may be limited, or the availability of overtime may be less due to the higher rate of pay and the ability to reach the double payment on a daily basis. And the longer work week of 54 possible hours in India doesn't leave much time for overtime pay, especially with the nighttime restrictions for many of the workers. So it would just be another consideration for human resources when managing regular and overtime pay. So next is paid annual leave. In India, workers with a minimum of 1 year tenure will earn 15 to 18 days of paid leave. In the United States, there is no federally mandated paid annual leave. In India, there are up to 20 federal paid holidays, and then in the United States, there are 10 federal holidays, but not all employers offer holiday pay. And in India, this paid annual leave will vary based on your region slightly, which is why it's shown as 15 to 18 days. So that is something to keep in mind for human resource management. So some implications for HR in India. Recruitment tends to be more focused on salary rather than benefits like paid time off, since workers are earning paid time off through government mandated programs. There's not a whole lot of flexibility or negotiation involved with benefit packages. It's more about your salary rate. So then your tenure status is tracked and valued, because as you have more time, you may earn more time off. And regulations will vary based on the region that you're in, so you would need to ensure that specific regional laws are followed, or have a blanket policy that can apply to the entire country when it comes to paid annual leave. Next is redundancy, or the firing or letting go of employees because their position is no longer needed. So in India, a third party must be notified of anyone who is let go due to redundancy. This is someone who's in the government who can ensure that the reason you're being fired or let go is in fact due to the redundancy of your position. Whereas in the United States, there is no third party notification or approval needed to be fired for this reason. In both countries, there is no retraining obligation to move someone to a different position if their position becomes redundant. But in India, there are priority rules for redundancy and reemployment. In India, there's also a minimum of 4.3 weeks notice that must be given. And severance pay is based on your tenure. So that ranges from 2.1 to 21.4 weeks of your salary based on how long you were in that position. In the United States, there's no notice period necessary or severance pay that must be given to the employee when they are let go due to redundancy. In India, there's also no unemployment protection, whereas in the United States, we do offer unemployment protections for people who are laid off or let go due to this reason. So, although both countries allow dismissal due to redundancy, the practices surrounding this will vary. So, implications for HRM in India: you would need to have sound practices in place to comply with these regulations. You would also need to manage the notice and severance pay for workers within India. With no unemployment protections in place, there is a stigma on employment termination, and it's something that many people want to avoid. And you may need to implement similar policies in the US to provide equal treatment to employees in both sites if you were to have employees in the US as well as in India. So next we will review human resource management practices that are different between the United States and India, specifically focusing on recruitment, work-life balance, and development of employees, and keeping in mind the cultural forces of the caste system, former British rule, and their booming population. There are many human resource practices that are directly impacted in India. So first we'll focus on the practice of recruitment. A large part of the issue that HR in India faces is the practice of recruiting, where professionals indicate they spend up to 80% of their efforts. The positions that are in demand are troubled by inflated salaries with low expectations for performance, and retention is a concern. In India, the literacy rate is low, between 60 and 70%, depending on the source, and only about 12% of the workforce has a bachelor's degree. So this limits the available human capital for many positions within India's now booming economy. And then with half of all women hired leaving the workforce by age 30, turnover often reaches into the 70th percentile in many industries. And HR is finding themselves in a constant balance of recruiting, hiring, and training without much time left to develop the existing employees that contribute to workforce culture. So Marcel Parker, who's president of human resources at the Raymond Group of companies in Mumbai, has said it's like building an aircraft while you're in the air. Workers are recruited by firms oftentimes simultaneously, or they will put their notice in 4 weeks in advance so that they can shop around for better offers while they are still employed. One practice that is used within recruiting, which aligns with the cultural dimension of collectivism, is internal recruitment and succession planning, which promotes organizational loyalty and retention. Additionally, the application and interview process is very extensive. A strong emphasis is placed on educational background as well as your family history, including your caste level, which is generally easy to identify based on your name. And common questions during an interview include your age, your marital status, family planning questions, as well as pictures. And discrimination based on your caste or other factors is very common. Another practice, which is in progress in India, is work life balance, where organizations seek to help their employees balance workload with outside life. And for a country like India, which is experiencing many cultural and economic changes, this is an ongoing effort as employees are finding themselves with greater expectations coupled with increased income and connectivity through technology. So in 2015, 30% of Indians felt work life balance had become harder in the last 5 years. And in 2019, 60% rated work life balance from average to terrible. Many people in India have long commutes within urban areas, some up to 6 hours in the day. There is also high pressure to outperform peers, with only those who are successful reaping the rewards, while others are left putting in extra time or work without benefit. Cultural changes allowing women to work outside the home have also led to a change in work life balance, as domestic duties have not shifted the same. In India, work life balance practices provide employees with many perks, including a housing rent allowance, a commuter allowance, several categories of paid leave, including casual, annual, and federal holidays, personal loans from the company, and on site cafeterias with subsidized meals. The changes in the economy and workforce, however, have left many feeling these perks are insufficient at helping to manage work life balance. Innovative practices that are recommended include childcare allowances, flexible work arrangements such as shorter shifts or remote work locations, and more paid time off. Lastly, we will look at the human resource practice of development. The practice of training and development in India is also an emerging topic. As stated previously, in many industries, turnover tends to be high, with employees barely reaching the completion of a training or probationary period before they start to seek new offers. And even with certain industries struggling with retention, training and development is still valued within India due to their importance on education and their alignment with the cultural dimension of future orientation. Entry level training is common as formal education does not always prepare for the actual job duties and needed skill set. Typically, entry level programs begin with soft skills such as communication, teamwork, etc., and training programs are found in house with entry level training lasting from 3 to 12 months. Ongoing and professional development typically do lead to promotions, and the training style is a top down approach, starting with broad concepts, working toward more specific application.
Hi, this is Selena Jahan doing the SWOT analysis on our country, India. Several decades after the freedom from the British Raj in 1947, the Indian economy is now amongst the fastest growing economy in the world. Economic growth is currently 8 to 9%, second only to China. And the reason China has been a comparison because of its growing population and its growing economy. The difference is the different phases of economic cycle toss economies around the world. The US has retained its position of being the world's largest economy since 1871. The size of the US economy was at 20.49 trillion in 2018 in nominal terms and is expected to reach 21.35 trillion to 2019. The strengths. What are the strengths? Demographics of India are favorable. India still has a positive birth rate, meaning that the size of the workforce will continue to grow for foreseeable future. A rising workforce helps to increase saving and investment. It also enables increased productivity. There is much scope for increases in efficiency. And this is because the infrastructure of India is so bad in place that even moderate improvements could lead to significant improvements in the productivity capacity of the economy. Last, in education, India has a relatively high level of literacy for an average GDP per capita level. The right to elementary education, which was passed from the Act 2002, has helped literacy rise from 52.2% in 1991 to 74.04% in 2011. In comparison to the US, although the United States has a low literacy level, however, it is higher than India. The United States score has a lower overall literacy score than the international average, a higher percentage of low performers than the international average, and a large literacy gap between the lower and higher socioeconomic groups than internationally. Now, what are the of India? To name a few weaknesses dealing with a business in India. The language barrier is real. India has 26 major languages, but your Indian counterparts will almost certainly speak English, which itself is a problem. It creates the illusion of communication and understanding. Many of us speak English and think Western. Your Indian partners speak English and think Indian. So take care to build real understanding. Also keep in mind there are many Indians with many different language and way of thinking. Secondly, different cultures. The visitors of most of Asia are visually reminded that they are in a vast different culture, but are often, especially in offices, India can appear quite westernized, and individuals also give that impression. It is better to open mind and see things and people more clearly, looking beyond the surface level, westernization, exploring culture differences and expanding the horizons. Last but not least, dealing with nonconformity. Indian culture provides masses of room for nonconformists. Diversity of dress, style of doing business, and differing reactions to personal contact are to be expected over there. Hosts might want to talk about diet or spirituality instead of the product. This is something where the foreign country and the foreign business will have to play along. Opportunities. India is well placed to benefit from the globalization and outsourcing. A legacy of the British Empire is that India has one of its largest English-speaking populations in the world. For labor-intensive industries like call centers, India is an obvious target for outsourcing, and have experienced this. This is an economic development like to continue in the future. Many of our calls in the United States have been outsourced to Indian call centers, and that is where consumers in the United States face this language and language barrier because the the tone, the all of that is so much different that it's hard to comprehend at times. Um, India is also the largest car producer. It's leading producers of small cars, mopeds. In 2013 to 2014, India produced 21.4 million vehicles, most 2 to 3 wheelers, making it one of the biggest car producers in the world, focusing on successful niches of cheap motorbikes for the Asian market. It also has taken over some major vehicle companies in the world. Last but not least, growth in the new companies. Um, India has become a hub for IT startups with the third highest level of business startups in 2014 and 15. Remittance. India has an important segment of its workplace working overseas, example Middle East. Foreign remittance to India amounted to US $68.9 billion in 2015, 3.5% of India's GDP. Threats. Now, the most important thing about threats is to avoid the stereotypes. India might be the most diverse country on earth. Religions, beliefs, language, and culture all immensely varied. Keeping an open mind will help avoid jumping to the wrong conclusion. Hosts could have spent many years in a US or UK and have a global outlook. However, you may also be dealing with an Indian company who have only regional views. as part of the diversity management, it is very important to conduct those researches and be aware of the cultural norms and mores.